Before we dive into this powerful story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the journey ahead. Let me tell you about the day my entire world collapsed. I'm 63 years old now, and I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong. It started 6 weeks ago when my youngest boy, Daniel, got into that motorcycle accident. 22 years old, always been a daredevil, just like I was at his age. The doctors at Memorial Hospital needed blood fast, and I rolled up my sleeve without hesitation. That's what fathers do, right? We protect our children. Just need to run a quick compatibility test, Mr. Blackwell, the young nurse said, drawing my blood with practiced efficiency. I didn't think much of it then. Hell, I'd donated blood for Daniel before when he was 7 and needed surgery to fix a broken arm. 3 days later, Dr. Patterson called me into his office. I'll never forget the look on his face, like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Harrington, I don't know how to tell you this," he said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "The blood compatibility test. There's an issue. Your blood type and Daniel's, they don't match for a father-son relationship." I laughed, actually laughed right in his face. "Doc, medical errors happen all the time. Maybe you mixed up the samples." But even as I said it, something cold settled in my stomach. Dr. Patterson had been our family physician for 15 years. He didn't make mistakes like that. "I ran the test 3 times, Harrington. I'm sorry. The drive home was a blur. 30 years of marriage to my beautiful Cordelia. 3 children I'd raised from diapers to diplomas. Thomas, 28, just made partner at his law firm. Rebecca, 25, teaching kindergarten and engaged to a wonderful young man. And Daniel, my baby, finishing his last year of college. I sat in my car outside our house, the house I'd bought with my first promotion at the engineering firm, the house where we'd raised our family, and tried to make sense of it. Maybe Daniel was adopted, and Cordelia never told me. But no, I remembered her pregnancy clear as day. I was there when her water broke, held her hand through 18 hours of labor. That's when the real question hit me like a sledgehammer. If Daniel wasn't mine, what about Thomas and Rebecca? For 2 weeks, I walked around like a zombie. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't look at my children without wondering. Cordelia kept asking what was wrong, kept trying to get me to talk. But how do you ask your wife of 30 years if she's been lying to you about the most fundamental thing in your life? Finally, I did something I never thought I'd do. I ordered DNA test kits online, 3 of them, 1 for each of my children. I told them it was for a family genealogy project that Cordelia wanted to do. They were excited about it, actually. Rebecca even joked about finding out if we had any royal blood. The waiting was torture. 3 weeks of pretending everything was normal. 3 weeks of watching my children laugh and joke and call me Dad, while this terrible doubt ate away at my soul like cancer. 3 weeks of lying next to Cordelia in the bed we'd shared for 3 decades, wondering if the woman I loved had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The results came on a Tuesday. I remember because Cordelia was at her garden club meeting, and the house was quiet. I'd been dreading this moment and desperately hoping for it at the same time. Maybe there would be an explanation. Maybe everything would make sense again. I opened Thomas's results first. My oldest boy, the one who looked so much like me that strangers used to comment on it. Probability of paternity, 0%. The words swam before my eyes. I had to read them 3 times before they sank in. Rebecca's results, probability of paternity, 0%. Daniel's results, probability of paternity, 0%. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at these 3 pieces of paper that had just destroyed my entire life. None of them were mine, not one. 30 years of bedtime stories and little league games and helping with homework and teaching them to drive, all based on a lie. The front door opened and I heard Cordelia's voice calling out, "Honey, I'm home. You won't believe what Margaret said about her new roses." Her footsteps were coming toward the kitchen and I quickly shoved the papers into the drawer. She walked in with that smile I'd fallen in love with 35 years ago, her arms full of gardening magazines. "How was your day, sweetheart?" she asked. The same question she'd asked me nearly every day for 3 decades. I looked at my wife, this woman I'd built my entire adult life around, and realized I didn't know her at all. I couldn't sleep that night. Cordelia lay beside me, breathing peacefully, completely unaware that I knew her secret. Every few minutes, I'd look over at her in the moonlight, streaming through our bedroom window, trying to reconcile this woman I'd loved for 30 years with someone capable of such deception. By morning, I'd made my decision. I had to confront her. The not knowing was killing me slowly, eating away at what was left of my sanity. After she made her usual breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, just the way I liked them, I waited for her to sit down with her coffee. "Cordelia, we need to talk." Something in my voice must have warned her because her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "What about, honey?" I pulled the DNA results from my jacket pocket and placed them on the kitchen table between us. Her face went white as she read the lab's name on the letterhead. "Harrington, what is this?" But her voice was shaking and I could see the fear in her eyes. "You tell me, Cordelia. You tell me how 3 children I've raised for 30 years aren't mine." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I watched my wife of 3 decades crumble before my eyes. Her hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Then explain it to me, because right now I'm thinking the woman I married, the woman I trusted with my entire life, has been lying to me for 30 goddamn years." I'd never raised my voice to Cordelia before. In all our years together, we'd never had a fight this serious. She flinched like I'd slapped her. "It was just once," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Harrington, please, it was just one mistake, one terrible, stupid mistake." "One mistake that resulted in 3 children?" "No, I mean, I don't know. I thought they were yours. I hoped they were yours." The words hit me like physical blows. She'd known. All these years, she'd known there was doubt about my children, and she'd never said a word. "When?" My voice was barely a whisper now. "When did this happen?" She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. "Right before we got married. I was scared, Harrington. Scared about the wedding, about becoming a wife, about everything changing. I went out with some girlfriends and I drank too much, and Who?" She looked up at me with those blue eyes that had captivated me since college. "It doesn't matter who. It was 30 years ago. It doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me who is the father of my children." "I don't know," she screamed. "I was drunk, Harrington. I barely remember it happening. Some man at a bar downtown. I never saw him again. I never wanted to see him again. It was the biggest mistake of my life." I stared at her, this woman I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to take her in my arms and tell her we'd figure it out together, that we'd get through this like we'd gotten through everything else. But something didn't feel right. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes when she talked about it. The way her story seemed too convenient, too vague. "Look at me, Cordelia." Slowly, she raised her head. "In 30 years of marriage, have I ever lied to you about anything important?" "No," she whispered. "Have I ever given you reason to doubt my love for you or our family?" "No." "Then I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need you to tell me the truth. Who is the father of Thomas, Rebecca, and Daniel?" The silence that followed lasted an eternity. I watched emotions play across her face, fear, guilt, desperation. Finally, she spoke in a voice so quiet, I had to lean forward to hear her. "I told you the truth, Harrington. I don't know who he was. But as she said it, her eyes flickered away from mine for just a split second. It was a tell I'd learned to recognize over 30 years of marriage. Cordelia was lying. That's when I knew this was bigger than one drunken mistake. This was something else entirely, something she was still hiding from me. My wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was still lying to my face even now, even after being caught. I stood up from the table, my legs shaky beneath me. "I'm going for a drive. I need to think. Harrington, please don't leave. We can work through this. Can we, Cordelia? Can we work through 30 years of lies?" I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear her sobbing, calling my name, begging me not to go. But I couldn't stay in that house for another second. Everything I'd believed about my life, about my marriage, about my family, it was all built on quicksand. As I drove aimlessly through our neighborhood, passing houses where other families were starting their days, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. If Cordelia was still lying to me now, after being confronted with undeniable proof, then I had no idea how deep this deception really went, and I was damn well going to find out. I drove for hours that day, my mind spinning with possibilities, each one worse than the last. By the time I finally headed home, I'd made a decision that would have been unthinkable just 24 hours earlier. I was going to hire a private investigator. The next morning, I told Cordelia I had some business to take care of downtown. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Red eyes, pale skin, that haunted expression of someone carrying a terrible secret. She tried to talk to me, to continue our conversation from the day before, but I couldn't handle it. Not yet. Marcus Reed's office was in a nondescript building on 5th Street. I'd found his name online after spending most of the previous evening researching private investigators in our city. His reviews were excellent, and more importantly, he specialized in infidelity cases. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 63, I was about to become one of those suspicious husbands I'd always pitied. Marcus was a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He didn't judge when I explained my situation, just listened and took notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. "Mr. Blackwell, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes the truth is harder to live with than the uncertainty." I thought about that for a long moment. "Marcus, I've been living a lie for 30 years. I need to know what really happened, no matter how much it hurts." He nodded slowly. "All right then. Let's start with your wife's activities over the past few years. Has she been secretive about anything? Phone calls, emails, unexplained absences?" I tried to think. Cordelia had always been social. Garden club, book club, volunteer work at the hospital. But lately, now that I really thought about it, she'd been getting a lot of phone calls that she'd take in another room. She'd always said it was one of her girlfriends, usually Margaret or Susan. "There have been phone calls," I admitted. "She always steps out of the room to take them. Says it's gossip from her friends, nothing I'd be interested in." Marcus made a note. "We'll start by examining her phone records. See if there are any patterns. I'll also run background checks on anyone who's been in regular contact with her. Do you have access to her computer or email?" The idea of spying on my own wife made me sick to my stomach, but I nodded. "She uses the computer in our home office. I know her password. It's our wedding anniversary." "That's actually not uncommon," Marcus said with a sad smile. "People often use significant dates as passwords, even when they're hiding things related to those same dates." Over the next week, Marcus worked his magic. He was discreet, professional, and thorough. Meanwhile, I went through the motions of normal life. I went to work, came home for dinner, watched television with Cordelia. But everything felt hollow, like I was playing a role in someone else's life. Cordelia kept trying to bring up our conversation, to explain herself further, but I couldn't bear to hear more lies. "I need time," I told her. "I need time to process this." 8 days after I hired him, Marcus called. "Mr. Blackwell, I think you should come to my office. I found some things you need to see." My heart was pounding as I sat across from his desk again. He had a manila folder in front of him, thick with papers and photographs. "Your wife has been in regular contact with someone for the past several years," he began. "Phone calls, emails, text messages, always when you're at work or out of the house." He slid a phone record across the desk. One number was highlighted in yellow, hundreds of calls over the past 2 years alone, some lasting over an hour. "Do you recognize this number?" Marcus asked. I studied it, but it didn't look familiar. "No. Who is it?" Marcus pulled out another sheet of paper, a background check. When I saw the name at the top, my blood turned to ice. Vincent Ashford. Vincent had been my best friend since we were 12 years old. He was the best man at my wedding, godfather to all 3 of my children. He was practically family. He came to every birthday party, every Christmas dinner, every major celebration for the past 30 years. His wife had died of cancer 5 years ago, and Cordelia and I had been his main support system through the grief. "This can't be right," I whispered. "Vincent is like a brother to me." Marcus's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell. The phone records don't lie. Your wife has been in constant contact with Vincent Ashford for years. Daily phone calls, sometimes multiple times a day." He pulled out printed emails next. My hands shook as I read them. They weren't explicitly romantic, but the tone was intimate, familiar, inside jokes, references to shared memories I wasn't part of, expressions of affection that went far beyond friendship. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. "I've been watching your house, documenting your wife's activities. Yesterday, while you were at work, Vincent came over. He stayed for 3 hours. The room was spinning. Vincent, my oldest friend, the man who'd stood beside me at my wedding, who'd held my children when they were babies, who'd been there for every major moment of my adult life." "How long?" I managed to ask. "Based on the phone records I could access, at least 3 years of regular contact. But Mr. Blackwell, I think this goes back much further. Some of the emails reference things that happened years ago, shared experiences. I think your wife and Vincent have been involved for a very long time." I sat there in stunned silence, the pieces of my shattered life rearranging themselves into an even more horrifying picture. It wasn't a random stranger who'd fathered my children. It was Vincent, my best friend, the man I'd trusted with everything. The betrayal was complete now. Not just my wife, but the person I'd considered a brother. 30 years of friendship, 30 years of trust, 30 years of believing I knew the people closest to me. I was wrong about everything. The drive home from Marcus's office was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every memory from the past 30 years was being rewritten in my mind. Vincent at our wedding, dancing with Cordelia while I talked to other guests. Vincent always volunteering to help Cordelia with household projects when I was working late. Vincent being there for the birth of each child, sometimes arriving at the hospital before I did. How could I have been so blind? When I pulled into our driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house Vincent had helped me paint last summer. The man had been in my home thousands of times, eaten at my table, slept in my guest room. He'd been living a double life right under my nose, and I'd been too trusting, too naive to see it. Inside, Cordelia was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Pot roast, my favorite. The normalcy of it all made me feel sick. How many times had she cooked this same meal after spending the afternoon with Vincent? How many times had she kissed me hello while his scent was still on her skin? "How was your day, honey?" she asked, not looking up from the stove. The same question she'd asked me for 30 years, now loaded with new meaning. "Enlightening," I said, taking a seat at the kitchen table. "Vincent called you today, didn't he?" The wooden spoon in her hand clattered to the floor. She turned around slowly, her face pale as snow. "Harrington, don't." I held up my hand. "Just don't. I know about the phone calls, Cordelia. I know about the visits when I'm at work. I know everything." She sank into the chair across from me, her whole body trembling. "It's not what you think." "Really? Then tell me what it is. Tell me why my wife of 30 years has been having secret conversations with my best friend. Tell me why the man who is supposed to be like a brother to me has been coming to my house when I'm not here." The silence stretched between us. I could see her mind racing, trying to come up with another lie, another explanation that would somehow make this acceptable. "We're friends," she finally whispered. "He's been lonely since Sarah died. I was just trying to help him through his grief. For 3 years, before his wife even got sick." Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected me to know how far back this went. "Cordelia, I hired a private investigator. I have phone records. I have evidence. So I'm going to ask you one more time. What is your relationship with Vincent Ashford?" The tears came then, harder than I'd ever seen her cry. Her whole body shook with sobs that seemed to come from her very soul. When she finally looked up at me, I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not just guilt, but fear. "I love him," she whispered. Those 3 words hit me like a physical blow. In all my worst imaginings, I hadn't prepared for that. An affair was one thing, but love, that meant this wasn't just about sex or a moment of weakness. This was about her choosing someone else, emotionally and physically, while staying married to me. "How long?" My voice was barely audible. "Harrington, please. How long have you been in love with my best friend?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft I had to lean forward to hear her. "Since before we got married, the world stopped. Everything stopped. My heart, my breathing, my thoughts. Everything just ceased to exist for a moment. Then the pain hit, worse than anything I'd ever felt in my life. You married me while you were in love with Vincent. I thought it would go away," she sobbed. "I thought if I married you, if I tried to be a good wife, the feelings would fade. I thought I could learn to love you the way you deserved, but you couldn't. I did love you, Harrington, I do love you, but Vincent, he's always been there in my heart. Even when I tried to forget him, even when I tried to be the wife you needed." I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. 30 years. 30 years I'd been second choice. 30 years I'd been married to a woman who was in love with someone else. "The children," I said, and I could hear the break in my own voice. "Thomas, Rebecca, Daniel, they're Vincent's, aren't they?" She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "All of them?" Another nod. I had to grip the back of the chair to keep from falling. Not only had I raised another man's children for 30 years, but that man was my best friend, and he'd known it all along. They'd both known it, and they'd let me live this lie, let me pour my heart and soul into being a father to children who weren't mine. "Does Vincent know?" "Yes," she whispered. "He's always known." The betrayal was complete now. Not just my wife, not just my friend, but both of them together, conspiring to deceive me for 3 decades. Every birthday party where Vincent had smiled and hugged my children, every Christmas morning where he'd watched them open presents, every school play, every graduation, every milestone, he'd been there as the real father while I played the fool. "I need you to leave," I said quietly. "Harrington, please, we can work through this. We can..." "Leave." My voice was stronger now, harder. "Pack a bag and get out of my house. Go to Vincent, go to the man you've always really wanted." She started to protest, started to cry harder, but I walked out of the kitchen and up to our bedroom. Their bedroom. Our marriage bed, where she'd lain with me for 30 years while dreaming of another man. From downstairs, I could hear her moving around, packing. An hour later, I heard the front door close and her car pull out of the driveway. I sat on the edge of the bed we'd shared for 3 decades and finally let myself break down. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside me, 30 years of pain and betrayal and humiliation pouring out all at once. I'd lost everything. My wife, my best friend, my children, my identity as a father and husband. At 63 years old, I was starting over from nothing, and I didn't even know who I really was anymore. 3 days passed in a haze of sleepless nights and untouched meals. The house felt like a tomb, every room filled with memories that were now tainted with lies. I'd taken sick leave from work, telling my boss I had a family emergency. If only he knew how accurate that was. On Thursday morning, Marcus called. His voice was more serious than usual. "Mr. Blackwell, I think you need to come in. I've uncovered something else. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about this situation." I dragged myself to his office, barely caring what new horror he'd discovered. How much worse could it get? My wife was in love with my best friend. My children weren't mine, and my entire adult life had been a lie. What more was there? Marcus had even more files on his desk this time, including what looked like official documents. His expression was grim. "I kept digging after our last meeting," he began. "Something about the timeline bothered me. If Cordelia and Vincent have been involved since before your marriage, I wanted to understand the full scope of their relationship." He pulled out a document that made my blood run cold. It was a marriage certificate, dated 2 months before my wedding to Cordelia. The names on it were Vincent Ashford and Cordelia Matthews, her maiden name. "What is this?" I whispered, though part of me already knew. "They were married first, Harrington. Secretly. Vincent and Cordelia had a civil ceremony at City Hall 2 months before your wedding. As far as the state is concerned, she was never legally married to you." The room was spinning. I gripped the arms of my chair to keep from falling over. "That's impossible. We had a church wedding. We filed papers. We've been married for 30 years. No, sir, you haven't. Your marriage was never legal because she was already married to someone else. You've been living in a bigamous relationship for 3 decades. Marcus pulled out more documents, bank records, property deeds, insurance policies. All of them told the same story. While I thought I was building a life with my wife, she'd been legally married to Vincent the entire time. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to a bank statement. "They have joint accounts. They own property together. That cabin you thought Vincent inherited from his father, they bought it together 5 years ago." My mind was reeling. The cabin where our families had spent countless vacations, where I'd taught my children to fish, where we'd had barbecues and made memories. It had all been a lie, a stage set for their deception. "There's more," Marcus continued. "Vincent's wife, Sarah, she knew. She was part of it." "What do you mean?" "I found correspondence between Sarah and Cordelia. Sarah was diagnosed with terminal cancer 7 years ago, not 5 like you were told. For 2 years before her death, she was helping orchestrate this whole charade. She knew Vincent was really married to Cordelia, and she was okay with it. He handed me printed emails between the 2 women. Sarah talking about how happy she was that Vincent had found his true love. Cordelia thanking Sarah for being so understanding about their complicated situation. Sarah even helped plan family gatherings, making sure I never suspected the truth. So Vincent's wife knew he was married to my wife. It gets worse, Harrington. Sarah left everything to Vincent and Cordelia jointly in her will. The house you thought Vincent inherited, half of it belongs to your wife. They've been living as a married couple in that house since Sarah died. I thought I'd reached the bottom of this nightmare, but apparently there were deeper levels of betrayal still to uncover. Vincent hadn't just stolen my wife and children. He'd created an elaborate decades-long con game with multiple people involved. "The children," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Do they know?" Marcus's expression grew even more serious. "That's what I called you about today. I've been monitoring their communications, their social media, their activities. Harrington, I think they do know. I think they've known for years." He pulled out printed screenshots from Facebook, Instagram, text messages. Thomas posting pictures from family gatherings at Vincent's house that I'd never been invited to. Rebecca calling Vincent Dad in private messages. Daniel asking Vincent for advice about college applications. "This message is from last Christmas," Marcus said, showing me a text conversation between Rebecca and Vincent. She's thanking him for the engagement ring he bought for her fiancé to propose with. She calls him Daddy and says she's glad he could be there for such an important moment. The engagement ring I thought I had helped pay for. The proposal I thought I had blessed as her father. Vincent had been there, playing the real father, while I was kept in the dark. "There's a pattern here," Marcus continued. "All 3 of your children have been maintaining separate relationships with Vincent for years. Real relationships. He's been their actual father in every way that matters, while you've been, I'm sorry to say this so bluntly, but you've been the financial provider they tolerated." I stared at the evidence spread across Marcus's desk. 30 years of my life, reduced to bank statements and secret messages. I hadn't just been betrayed by my wife and best friend. I'd been betrayed by the 3 young people I'd loved and raised as my own children. How long have they known? Based on what I've found, I believe they were told the truth when they turned 18. Old enough to understand, old enough to keep the secret. Thomas has known for 10 years, Rebecca for 7, Daniel for 4 years. My youngest son had known for 4 years that I wasn't his real father, and he'd never said a word. He'd let me pay for his college, let me give him advice, let me worry about his future, all while knowing I was just the man who'd been tricked into raising him. "There's one more thing," Marcus said quietly. I found this in Vincent's house yesterday when he was at work. He pulled out a photograph that made my heart stop. It was a family portrait. Vincent, Cordelia, Thomas, Rebecca and Daniel, all dressed in matching Christmas outfits, all smiling at the camera like a perfect happy family. It was dated from last year. They'd been taking family photos without me, creating memories, celebrating holidays, being the family they really were while I sat at home alone, wondering why my wife and children seemed so distant. I was nothing to them, less than nothing. I was the outsider they'd all been pretending to care about for years while living their real lives with each other. At 63 years old, I finally understood the truth. I'd never had a family at all. I sat in my car outside Vincent's house for an hour, staring at the place I'd visited countless times over the years. The white colonial with green shutters that I'd helped him paint. The driveway where we'd played basketball with the kids. The front porch where we'd shared beers and talked about our dreams for retirement. Now I knew the truth. This wasn't just Vincent's house. It was their house. Vincent and Cordelia's. The home where they'd lived as husband and wife while I played the fool. My hands were shaking as I walked up the front steps. I didn't knock. I still had the spare key Vincent had given me years ago for emergencies. I let myself in, just like I had dozens of times before, when I was still the naive friend who trusted everyone. I found them in the kitchen. Vincent was cooking dinner while Cordelia set the table. They looked so natural together, so comfortable, like they'd been doing this domestic dance for decades, which I realized they had. "Hello, Vincent," I said from the doorway. They both spun around, and the terror on their faces would have been satisfying if I hadn't been dying inside. Cordelia dropped the plates she was holding. They shattered on the tile floor, just like my life had shattered a week ago. "Harrington," Vincent said, his voice barely a whisper. This man who'd been my best friend since we were 12 years old couldn't even look me in the eye. 35 years, I said, stepping into the kitchen. 35 years we've been friends, Vincent. Since 7th grade when you moved to town and I helped you deal with the bullies who were picking on you. Remember that? Harrington, please. I defended you. I stood up for you. I made sure you had a place to belong. My voice was getting louder, all the rage and pain of the past week finally finding its target. And this is how you repay me. Vincent was a big man. Always had been. 6'3", broad shoulders, the kind of guy who commanded respect. But right now he looked small, diminished, like a child caught stealing cookies. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said. "Really? Then how was it supposed to happen, Vincent? When exactly were you planning to tell me that you'd been screwing my wife for 30 years? When were you going to mention that my children are actually your children? When were you going to let me know that my entire adult life has been a lie?" Cordelia was crying, but I ignored her. My business was with Vincent now, man to man, friend to friend, former friend. "I never meant to hurt you," Vincent said. "You never meant to hurt me?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You married my wife, you fathered my children, you let me raise them, pay for them, love them, while you knew the whole time they weren't mine, and you never meant to hurt me?" "We fell in love, Harrington. We couldn't help it. Before my wedding, Vincent. You fell in love before my wedding and you never said a word. You stood there as my best man. You handed me the ring. You watched me marry a woman who was already married to you, and you said nothing." Vincent finally looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that made everything worse. It wasn't guilt or shame or regret. It was pity. He pitied me. "You wouldn't have understood," he said. "You were so excited about the wedding, so happy. We didn't want to ruin that for you. Aye, so instead you ruined my entire life. We thought maybe it would work itself out. Maybe Cordelia would learn to love you properly. Maybe what we had would fade. We tried to stay away from each other, Harrington. We really did try. For how long? A week? A month? When did you give up trying?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "The honeymoon," I said, the realization hitting me like a sledgehammer. "You couldn't even wait for me to get back from my honeymoon." Cordelia sobbed harder, confirming what I'd guessed. While I was in Hawaii, thinking I was starting my new life with the woman I loved, she was back home with Vincent, consummating their real marriage. Thomas was conceived on my honeymoon, wasn't he? I continued, while I was taking pictures of sunsets and buying souvenirs, thinking about our future together. You two were creating the child I'd spend the next 28 years believing was mine. Harrington, stop, Cordelia begged. Please, just stop. No, I won't stop. I've been stopping for 30 years. I've been stopping every time I had a doubt, every time something didn't feel right, every time my gut told me something was wrong. I'm done stopping. I turned back to Vincent. The kids know, don't they? They've known for years. Vincent's shoulders sagged. We told them when they turned 18. We thought they had a right to know the truth. But I didn't have a right to know the truth. It would have destroyed you. It would have destroyed me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Vincent, I spent 30 years loving children who weren't mine, married to a woman who was in love with someone else, best friends with a man who was lying to my face every single day. And now you're telling me you did it to protect me. We did love you, Harrington, in our own way. We did love you. You loved my money. You loved my stability. You loved having someone to take care of your wife and children while you played the romantic hero in the shadows. Vincent flinched like I'd hit him, but he didn't deny it. Where are my children now? I asked. Where are Thomas and Rebecca and Daniel? Are they coming for dinner? Is this one big happy family reunion? They're confused, Harrington. They don't know how to handle this. They love you, but I'm not their father. You raised them. You'll always be their father in that way. Will I? Because from what I've seen, they've been living their real lives with you for years, while treating me like a stranger they had to tolerate. I looked around the kitchen, at the home Vincent and Cordelia had built together, while I lived alone in what I thought was our house. Family photos on the refrigerator that didn't include me. Children's artwork from years ago that had somehow found its way here instead of to my house. I want you to know something, Vincent, I said, my voice deadly quiet now. You didn't just betray me. You didn't just steal my wife and children. You stole my entire identity. You took away 30 years of my life, and you can never give them back. I headed for the door, then turned back one more time. Oh, and Vincent, we're not friends anymore. We're never speaking again. If I see you on the street, I'll cross to the other side. If you show up at my house, I'll call the police. You're dead to me now, both of you. As I walked out of their house, their real house, their actual home, I could hear Cordelia crying and Vincent calling my name, but I didn't look back. I was done looking back. The hardest part wasn't losing my wife or my best friend. The hardest part was facing my children, the 3 young people I'd loved unconditionally for their entire lives, only to discover they'd been lying to me for years. I called Thomas first. My oldest boy, the one who looked so much like Vincent that I should have seen it years ago. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice cautious. Dad, I heard you and Mama having problems. Problems. I almost laughed at the understatement. Thomas, I need you to come over. We need to talk. I'm actually pretty busy with work right now. Thomas! My voice was firm, the father tone I'd used when he was a child and had done something wrong. This isn't a request. An hour later, he was sitting in my living room, fidgeting with his hands like he used to do when he was nervous as a kid. He was 28 years old now, a successful lawyer, but in that moment, he looked like the scared little boy I used to comfort after nightmares. How long have you known? I asked without preamble. His face went pale. Known what? Don't lie to me, Thomas. Not now. Not after everything else. How long have you known that Vincent is your biological father? The silence stretched between us for what felt like forever. Finally, he spoke in a voice so quiet I had to lean forward to hear him. Since I was 18. 10 years. You've known for 10 years and never said a word. Dad, I'm not your dad, am I? That's what you found out 10 years ago. That the man who raised you, who taught you to throw a baseball, who helped you with your homework every night, who paid for your college education, that man isn't actually your father. Tears were streaming down Thomas's face now. You are my dad, Harrington. You raised me. You're the one who was there for everything. But Vincent is your real father. Biologically, yes, but that doesn't change. It changes everything, Thomas. Because you knew. For 10 years, you've been living a lie, and you let me live it too. I pulled out some of the evidence Marcus had given me, photos from Vincent's house, text messages, social media posts showing Thomas at family gatherings I'd never been invited to. Christmas last year, I said, showing him a photo. You told me you couldn't make it to our dinner because you were working, but here you are, opening presents with Vincent and your mother and your siblings, your real family. Natty, Thomas broke down completely then, sobbing like I hadn't seen him cry since he was a child. We didn't know how to tell you. We didn't want to hurt you. So instead, you decided to keep lying to me? To keep pretending I mattered while you built your real relationship with your actual father? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Thomas? Explain it to me. Help me understand how my son, the boy I taught to drive, the young man I walked through his first heartbreak, the person I was proudest of in the whole world, help me understand how he could look me in the eye for 10 years and lie. We were protecting you. From what? From the truth? From reality? Thomas, I spent 10 years thinking we had a close relationship while you were getting advice from Vincent, celebrating holidays with Vincent, building your real life with Vincent. How is that protecting me? I called Rebecca next, and she came over with tears already in her eyes. My little girl, the one who used to crawl into my lap when she was scared, the kindergarten teacher who was getting married next month. How long? I asked her the same question. 7 years, she whispered, since I turned 18. Your wedding next month. Were you planning to invite me? Of course. Dad, you're walking me down the aisle. Am I, or was that just for show? Because Vincent is paying for half the wedding, isn't he? Vincent picked out your engagement ring. Vincent is the one you've been planning this with. She couldn't deny it because it was all true. Every major decision in her adult life had been made with Vincent's input, while I was kept on the sidelines, playing the role of the fake father. Who's going to give you away, Rebecca? Really? Because I found the seating charts in Vincent's house. I'm sitting in the 3rd row while Vincent is in the front row with your mother. We can change that. No, we can't. Because this whole thing has been a lie. Your engagement party that I helped pay for. Vincent was there as your real father while I was just the guy writing checks. Daniel was the hardest. My baby, the one who'd just turned 22, the one who'd almost died in that motorcycle accident that started this whole nightmare. When he walked into the house, he couldn't even look at me. 4 years, I said before he could sit down. You've known for 4 years. Dad, please. I'm not your dad, Daniel. We've established that. Vincent is your dad. I'm just the man who's been paying your college tuition while your real father gets to be the cool guy you actually talk to. That's not fair. Fair? I stood up, my voice rising. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been telling me the truth 4 years ago. Fair would have been letting me decide whether I wanted to keep paying for the education of a young man who was lying to my face every single day. I never asked you to pay for anything. You didn't have to ask, Daniel. I did it because I thought you were my son. I did it because I loved you, because I would have done anything for you. The 3 of them sat in my living room, these young adults I'd raised from babies, and I realized I didn't know them at all. They weren't the people I thought they were. They were strangers who'd been playing roles in my life while living their real lives somewhere else. Here's what I don't understand, I said, looking at all 3 of them. How did you sleep at night? How did you look me in the eye and call me Dad and let me worry about you and be proud of you, knowing it was all based on a lie? Because we do love you, Rebecca said through her tears. You're still our father in every way that matters. No, I'm not. Vincent is your father in every way that matters. I was just the paycheck. I was just the stable guy who took care of the bills while your real father got to be the hero. Thomas leaned forward. That's not true, Dad. You were there for everything. You raised us. You loved us. I loved who I thought you were. But who are you really? Are you the people who sat at my dinner table every night for 20 years? Or are you the people who've been secretly celebrating holidays and planning life events with Vincent while treating me like an outsider? The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. "I want you all to leave," I said finally. "I want you to go back to Vincent and Cordelia and your real family. I want you to stop pretending that I matter to you." "Dad, please, stop calling me Dad," I shouted, louder than I'd ever shouted at any of them in their entire lives. "I'm not your dad. Vincent is your dad. Go be with your real father and stop torturing me with this charade." They left, all three of them crying, but they left, and I sat alone in the house that had once been filled with family, realizing that I'd been alone all along. I'd raised 3 children who were never really mine, loved them completely, sacrificed for them willingly, and in return, they'd given me 30 years of lies. A week passed in complete isolation. No calls from Cordelia, no visits from the children, no contact from Vincent. The silence was deafening, but it was also revealing. Their absence showed me just how superficial their presence in my life had really been. When the lies were stripped away, there was nothing left. I was sitting in my home office, staring at 30 years of family photos that now felt like evidence of an elaborate con game, when Marcus called. "Mr. Blackwell, I need you to come in immediately. I've uncovered something that changes everything we thought we knew about this situation." I almost didn't go. How much more devastating truth could I handle? But something in Marcus's voice, an urgency I hadn't heard before, made me drag myself to his office one more time. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days. His desk was covered with documents, photographs, and what looked like legal papers. When I sat down, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Harrington, I've been digging deeper into Vincent and Cordelia's relationship, trying to understand the full timeline. What I found," he paused, running his hands through his hair, "what I found is beyond anything we imagined." He pulled out a thick folder and opened it to reveal photographs that made my blood run cold. They were wedding photos, not the secret City Hall wedding I already knew about, but a real ceremony. Vincent in a tuxedo, Cordelia in a wedding dress, surrounded by family and friends. The date stamp showed they were taken 6 months before I even met Cordelia. They were married a full year before you met her, Harrington. Everything, your entire relationship, was planned from the beginning. I stared at the photos, trying to process what I was seeing. There was Vincent's father, who I'd known for decades, smiling at their wedding. There were Cordelia's parents, who had welcomed me into their family. There were friends and relatives who had later attended my wedding to Cordelia, acting as if it was the first time they'd seen her get married. "I don't understand," I whispered. Marcus pulled out more documents, financial records, property deeds, business partnerships. Vincent was in serious financial trouble 6 months after their wedding. Bad investments, gambling debts, failed business ventures. He was about to lose everything, including the house his father had left him. So Cordelia got a job at the engineering firm where you worked. She specifically requested to work in your department. She researched you, Harrington. She knew you were single, financially stable, well-regarded at the company. She targeted you. The room was spinning. My first meeting with Cordelia, which I'd always thought was a beautiful coincidence. The new secretary, who'd smiled at me in the break room, who'd seemed so interested in my work, who'd made me coffee and brightened my days. It had all been calculated. "She seduced you on purpose," Marcus continued. "The goal was to get you to marry her, providing financial stability while she remained legally married to Vincent. You were never supposed to be her husband. You were supposed to be their financial solution." Marcus pulled out bank records showing systematic transfers of money from my accounts to various investments and properties that I now realized belonged to Vincent and Cordelia jointly. Over 30 years, you've funded their entire life together. The cabin, the house renovations, Vincent's failed businesses, the children's private schools and colleges. It all came from your salary while they lived as a married couple. "The children," I said, the full horror dawning on me, "were part of the plan from the beginning. Vincent and Cordelia wanted children, but they needed someone to pay for them. You weren't just raising another man's children, Harrington. You were the hired help they kept around to fund their family. Marcus showed me more evidence. Life insurance policies that named Vincent as the beneficiary instead of me. Property deeds that somehow had my name forged on them. Transferring ownership to Cordelia, who then transferred everything to Vincent. Investment accounts that I thought belonged to our family, but were actually jointly owned by Vincent and Cordelia. They've been systematically stealing from you for 30 years, Marcus said. Every promotion you got, every bonus, every penny you saved for your family's future, it was all transferred to them. But the worst was yet to come. Marcus pulled out a thick stack of papers that looked like legal documents. I found these in Vincent's house yesterday. They're divorce papers, dated for next month. Divorce papers? Cordelia was planning to divorce you, not to marry Vincent. She's already married to Vincent. She was going to divorce you and take half of everything you own, which would have left you with almost nothing, since most of your assets have already been secretly transferred to them. I stared at the papers with my forged signature at the bottom. How? They've been planning this for months. The motorcycle accident that led to the blood test. I don't think it was an accident, Harrington. Daniel's bike was sabotaged. They needed you to discover the truth in a way that would make you the one to leave, so they wouldn't have to pay alimony or split assets in a contested divorce. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The accident that had seemed so random, so unfortunate. Daniel's mysterious recovery that had been faster than the doctors expected. The way everyone had seemed so calm about the whole situation while I was the only one panicking. They tried to kill Daniel? Not kill him. Just injure him enough to require a blood transfusion that would expose the truth. They gambled that you'd be so devastated by learning about the paternity that you'd leave quietly, letting them keep everything they'd stolen from you over the years. Marcus pulled out one final document that made my heart stop completely. It was a handwritten letter from Cordelia to Vincent, dated just 2 weeks ago. "Read it," Marcus said quietly. The letter was in Cordelia's handwriting, and every word was like a knife to my heart. "My darling Vincent, we're so close to finally being free. Harrington suspects nothing about the divorce papers, and once he discovers the truth about the children, he'll be so devastated he won't think to fight for anything. After 30 years of pretending to love that boring, naive man, we can finally live our real life together. The children are excited too. They're tired of pretending he matters to them. Thomas says it will be a relief not to have to include him in anything anymore. We'll have the house, the investments, the savings, everything we've worked so hard to build together. And we'll finally be rid of the man who never deserved any of it." I sat in Marcus's office, holding this letter that revealed the final devastating truth. I hadn't just been betrayed by my wife and best friend. I hadn't just been lied to by my children. I had been the target of a 30-year con game, orchestrated by people who had never loved me at all. Everything I thought I knew about my life, every memory I cherished, every moment of happiness I'd experienced, it had all been an elaborate performance designed to separate me from my money while they lived their real lives together. At 63 years old, I finally understood the complete truth. I had never mattered to any of them at all. The rage that consumed me after reading Cordelia's letter was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For 30 years, I'd been the most gullible man alive, funding my own humiliation while they laughed behind my back. But now I knew the truth, and I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I called my lawyer, Robert Hayes, who'd handled our wills and property transfers over the years. When I told him what I'd discovered, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Jesus Christ, Harrington, how long have you known about this?" 2 weeks. "But Robert, I need to know, did you help them forge my signature on any documents?" Another pause. "I think you better come in. We need to talk in person." An hour later, I was sitting in Robert's office, watching him squirm as he spread documents across his desk. My lawyer of 15 years couldn't meet my eyes. "Some of these signatures," he said finally, "I thought they looked a little different from your usual ones, but Cordelia always brought them in. said you were too busy at work to come yourself, so you helped them steal from me. I didn't know, Harrington. I swear I didn't know. She was your wife. I had no reason to suspect. How much, Robert? How much of my money did they transfer out of accounts you thought were mine? Robert pulled out financial records that made my stomach turn. Over the past decade alone, nearly $750,000 had been moved from accounts in my name to accounts controlled by Vincent and Cordelia. My retirement fund, gone, transferred to an investment account in the Cayman Islands. Technically legal since Cordelia was listed as a joint owner, but my pension, redirected to an account that names Vincent as the beneficiary. Again, your wife had power of attorney, so stop calling her my wife. I slammed my hand on the desk. She was never my wife, Robert. She was married to someone else the entire time. Every document you processed for her was based on fraud. Robert's face went pale as the legal implications hit him. Harrington, if what you're saying is true, then every transaction we processed over the past 30 years could be considered fraudulent. The statute of limitations might protect some of it, but I want it all back, every penny, and I want them prosecuted for fraud, theft, and bigamy. That's going to be complicated. Some of the money has been invested, some spent. The house they've been living in was purchased with funds from your accounts, but it's in Vincent's name. Proving fraud after 30 years, then we better get started. I left Robert's office with a plan. For 30 years, I'd been the passive victim of their scheme. Now it was time for me to take control. My first stop was the police station. Detective Maria Santos listened to my story with growing amazement, taking notes as I laid out the evidence Marcus had gathered. Mr. Blackwell, what you're describing is one of the most elaborate long-term fraud schemes I've ever heard of. But I have to warn you, prosecuting something like this after 30 years is going to be extremely difficult. I don't care how difficult it is. They destroyed my life. They stole my money. They committed bigamy and fraud. I want them held accountable. Detective Santos nodded. We'll need to bring in the FBI for the financial crimes, especially the offshore accounts. This is bigger than local law enforcement can handle. My next stop was the engineering firm where I'd worked for 35 years. I walked into the HR director's office and laid out the truth about how Cordelia had gotten her job there, how she'd targeted me specifically as part of their con game. Mr. Blackwell, if what you're saying is true, then we may have been unknowing participants in a fraud scheme. We'll need to review all of her employment records, her background check, everything. She probably lied on her application too. I want everything investigated. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 30 years. I called Cordelia's parents. They were in their 80s now, living in a retirement community in Florida. When Cordelia's mother answered the phone, her voice was warm and familiar. Harrington, what a lovely surprise. How are you, dear? I'm calling to ask you about Cordelia's first wedding, the real one, to Vincent. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. You knew, I said. You were there. You watched your daughter marry Vincent. And then 6 months later you came to our wedding and pretended it was the first time you'd seen her in a wedding dress. Harrington, please understand. I understand perfectly. Your daughter was in financial trouble and you helped her find a mark. You helped her con me. It wasn't supposed to go on this long, Cordelia's mother said, her voice breaking. It was supposed to be temporary, just until Vincent got back on his feet. But then the children came and the years passed, and it got so complicated. Complicated? I laughed bitterly. It got complicated because you were all living off my money while treating me like a fool. I hung up on her and immediately called Vincent's father, who was still alive at 91 years old. His reaction was the same. Guilt, excuses, justifications for why they'd all participated in destroying my life. The next morning, I found Vincent waiting for me in my driveway. He looked haggard, desperate. Word was getting around about my investigation, and he knew his world was about to collapse. Harrington, we need to talk. No, we don't. You need to get off my property before I call the police. Please, just listen to me. We can work this out. We can make this right. Make it right. Vincent, you stole 30 years of my life. You stole my money, my identity, my children. You tried to have Daniel injured just to expose your lies. How exactly do you plan to make that right? We'll give you back whatever you want. The house, the money, whatever. I don't want anything from you except to see you in prison. Vincent's desperation turned to anger. You think you're so innocent in all this? You think you were such a great husband and father? You were boring, Harrington. You were predictable and dull, and Cordelia was miserable with you from day one. Then she should have divorced me instead of stealing from me for 30 years. She stayed because she felt sorry for you, because you were so pathetic and alone that leaving you would have been cruel. I looked at this man who'd been my best friend for 50 years, and I felt nothing but disgust. You know what, Vincent? You're right. I was pathetic. I was naive and trusting and stupid enough to believe that people I loved wouldn't systematically destroy my life for money. But I'm not that man anymore. I walked past him toward my house. You'll be hearing from my lawyers and the FBI and the police. I hope 30 years of my money was worth it, because you're going to spend whatever time you have left paying for what you did. As I closed the door behind me, I could hear Vincent shouting my name, begging me to reconsider, but I was done listening to lies. For the first time in 30 years, I was finally fighting back. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of a small cabin in the mountains of North Carolina, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was a sight I'd never appreciated before, not because I hadn't seen sunrises, but because I'd never been truly free to enjoy them. The legal battles had been brutal, but successful. Vincent and Cordelia were both facing federal charges for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The FBI had frozen their assets, including the house I'd unknowingly paid for and the offshore accounts where they'd hidden my retirement money. Most of my stolen funds were being recovered, though the lawyers warned it would take years to sort everything out completely. The bigamy charges had been the easiest to prove. Cordelia's marriage to me was declared null and void, which meant she had no legal claim to anything I owned. Vincent's assets were being liquidated to pay restitution. The children, I still struggled with what to call them, were on their own now, finally facing the consequences of 30 years of lies. Thomas had lost his job at the law firm when his participation in the fraud came to light. Apparently, using his legal knowledge to help his parents forge documents was considered a serious ethical violation. Rebecca's wedding had been called off when her fiancé learned the truth about her family. Daniel had dropped out of college when the money dried up. Part of me felt sorry for them, but a larger part of me remembered that they'd known the truth for years and chosen to keep lying to me. They'd made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. I'd sold the house in town, the house where I'd lived 30 years of lies, and used the money to buy this little cabin. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms and a kitchen, but it was mine. Really mine. For the first time in my adult life, I was living somewhere that hadn't been contaminated by deception. The isolation had been difficult at first. After 30 years of believing I had a family, the silence was deafening. But gradually, I'd learned to appreciate the peace. No more walking on eggshells, wondering why my wife seemed distant. No more questioning why my children never seemed to need me. No more feeling like an outsider in my own life. 3 months ago, I'd started volunteering at the local animal shelter. It was there that I met Sarah Patterson, not to be confused with Vincent's deceased wife, but a 60-year-old widow who'd lost her husband to cancer 2 years earlier. Sarah was gentle and kind, with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of a life filled with genuine joy. We'd started as friends, bonding over our shared experience of loss and betrayal. Sarah's husband hadn't deceived her, but death had taken him away just as surely as lies had taken my family. We understood each other's loneliness. "You're different from when I first met you," Sarah said, joining me on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. She'd been staying at the cabin for the past month, and her presence had filled spaces in my heart I didn't even know were empty. How so? You seem lighter somehow, like you've put down a weight you didn't realize you were carrying. She was right. For 30 years, I'd carried the burden of trying to figure out why I never felt quite connected to my own family, why something always seemed slightly off, why I felt like I was on the outside looking in. Now I knew it was because I had been on the outside. They'd made sure of that. I got a call from Detective Santos yesterday, I told Sarah. Vincent pleaded guilty. He'll serve 8 to 12 years in federal prison. And how do you feel about that? I thought about it. A year ago, the idea of my best friend going to prison would have devastated me. Now, it felt like justice. I feel like the truth finally won, I said. My phone buzzed with a text message. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. It was from Daniel, the first contact I'd had with any of the children in months. Harrington, I know I have no right to ask, but could we talk? I'm not asking for money or help. I just want to apologize, really apologize, for everything. I showed the message to Sarah. She read it thoughtfully. What are you going to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to ignore it. Part of me is curious what he has to say. He was the youngest when they told him the truth. Maybe his guilt is different from the others. That afternoon, Daniel drove up to the cabin in an old, beat-up car that was a far cry from the nice sedan I'd helped him buy for college. He looked thin, older than his 22 years, like the weight of his choices had aged him. We sat on the porch, the silence awkward between us. Finally, he spoke. I've been working construction, manual labor. It's the first honest work I've ever done, and I'm good at it. He paused, looking out at the mountains. I wanted you to know that everything I have now, I earned myself. No lies, no schemes, no stolen money. Good for you, I said, and I meant it. I also wanted you to know that I told the FBI everything. About the accident, about the family gatherings you weren't invited to, about all of it. I know it's too late, but I wanted to do the right thing at least once. We talked for 2 hours. Daniel told me about the guilt that had eaten away at him for 4 years, about how he'd wanted to tell me the truth dozens of times, but had been terrified of destroying the only family structure he'd ever known. He told me about losing his friends when the truth came out, about his siblings blaming him for cooperating with the authorities, about learning to live with the consequences of 30 years of family lies. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said, as he prepared to leave. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I'm trying to be a better person than the family that raised me. After he left, Sarah and I sat quietly on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. How do you feel? She asked. Strangely, I feel proud of him. For the first time in his life, he's being honest and taking responsibility. Maybe there's hope for him yet. And for you? I looked at this woman who'd brought light back into my life, who'd shown me what genuine love felt like after 30 years of performance and pretense. For me, I feel like I'm finally home. That night, Sarah and I talked about the future, about making our arrangement permanent, about building something real together based on truth and mutual respect, about the difference between being someone's financial convenience and being someone's chosen partner. At 63, I'd lost everything I thought mattered: my wife, my children, my best friend, my life savings. But in losing all of that, I'd found something much more valuable: myself. I'd discovered who I really was when I wasn't trying to be what someone else needed me to be. I'd learned that family isn't about blood or legal documents or shared history. It's about people who choose to love you for who you really are, not for what you can provide them. As I drifted off to sleep with Sarah beside me, I realized that for the first time in 30 years, I was exactly where I belonged, with someone who wanted me there, not for my money or my usefulness, but simply because she loved me. The lies had finally ended, and the truth had set me free.